Hi, I'm Ajit Leni. Welcome to the Enterprise Architecture video series part 6. We are looking at the 6-layer framework that I introduced for establishing enterprise architecture practices. So in the last few videos, we looked at the top 3 layers, usage, evolution, and then in the last video, we looked at the breadth and depth. On this video, we'll look at the architecture domains. Since this is a very vast domain, a vast layer, we're going to spend next few videos on this domain before we move to the next layer. Right. Let's start with a brief on the 4 different domains in this layer, right? So as I said earlier, I'm basically using the TOGAF definition of the architecture domains itself. So there are 4 different domains: business architecture, information architecture, application architecture, and the technology architecture, right? So on the business architecture, it has to do with how we define the business itself, right? So the enterprise, how are we representing the enterprise we are capturing in the enterprise architecture? So this typically involves all the business processes, business entities that's involved in the process, business functions that are part of the processes, and then the customer or the user journeys, right? So these are typical, it's not exhaustive list, but this is just one I want to give a brief on what all the different components that are involved in this, right? So this is a typical components of a business architecture. On the information architecture side, it is primarily the information model. And if we want to get into details, we want to get into a data model also in the information architecture. On the application architecture side, it has to primarily do with system flows, right? And application landscape or any interface specifications, things like interface specifications, etc., would come in the application architecture, right? Primarily looking at the external of the application, meaning the landscapes and how the data flows, and the internal aspects of the applications as well. On a technology architecture side, it has to do with the deployment and implementation architecture. What technology are we involving and how is it getting deployed or implemented? Whether it's on be on a cloud or a on-premise hardware, etc. The technology landscape and any standards or specifications that we have to follow. Right, that's a typical thing we follow on the technical architecture. And when we define all these components, we should always have to have a mapping between all this. So when I'm defining a business entity, I should be able to trace and relate to the information model, which is where this business entity is getting defined. Or if it's a business process, what are the different information model and entities that are related to that business process. And similarly, on the information model, a business entity or information, a object or a class that we defined on the information model, what applications it is related to, right? In what flows they are what flows they are part of, right? Similarly, for an application, what technology are we using, etc., how are getting delivered. So each of these components are related and we should be able to trace between them. So that's another big aspect I wanted to highlight. So now let's start with, in this video, the rest of the video, we're going to look at business architecture. And also we won't be able to complete the business architecture components in this video. So we'll continue into the next couple of videos on the business architecture. Then we'll move into the other domains. So to start with, I would like to define a meta model for the business architecture itself, right? So this is basically, I want to give an brief. This is basically an exercise to identify the components that what are the components involved in the business architecture, right? So on the top, we have a logical model, how we can represent a business, right? What constitutes a business, right? So that's the top logical model. And then how that translates into on a runtime, what happens, how this reflects on a runtime is what I'm capturing here, right? So this basically gives a brief or a understanding about what are the different components a business architecture needs to have, right? So to start with, what is a business, right? A business is basically collection of business services. So the enterprise offers a set of business services. So if we look at it, a bank, right? The bank offers a set of services. It could be a loan service. It could be a banking account service. It could be a credit card service, right? So basically, any enterprise basically is a bunch of business services which are offered to an external entity, right? External role, right? It could be external role, could be a partner, external role could be a customer, etc., right? It could be partner, vendor, whoever it is. So We are providing, an enterprise is providing a set of business services or offering a set of business services to an external role, right? And the business service, each business service basically constitutes of a set of business processes. So if I am looking at a loan process, it has a bunch of processes involved, right? Which is basically initiating a loan, approving a loan, distributing the money, right? A closure of the loan, right, etc. Right. So all these are in processes that's part of this business service. Right? And each service, each process, when business process, when you look at it, it is basically constitutes of a set of business functions. So if I am looking at an approval of a loan, right, the process, that basically includes credit verification of the customer, maybe the address verification for verifying the documents, looking at the financial viability, approving the amount, what amount. So there are a bunch of different business functions, which is actually performed by an internal role, right? So business services are offered to an external role, and which is basically breaks down into business processes, and business function comes down to business function, which is performed by an internal role. So that internal role could be an employee, or meaning a human, or could be a system itself, right? It could be a digital role as well, right? So and this business function basically uses a business entity, one or more business entities, right? So it could be if I'm looking at an approval of the loan, or I'm taking the credit, doing a credit verification. So let's look at credit verification as a business function, right? So that looks at the application, right? It looks at the documents, right? So these are business entities that that function is using, right? So when we look at business entity, so it could be a loan. Say in this particular example, let's say loan, right? Loan as a business entity. It goes through a set of states. I mean, it may have an initial state, goes through approved state, it goes through a closure state, right? So it can have a set of states. It also can have a set of characteristics, right? And also it can exhibit a set of behaviors, right? And when we look at business function, right? Business function is an action or a set of actions that an internal role performs, right? So there could be, if you look at, say, a business service has 10 different business processes, and each of these processes have, say, 10 functions inside each of them, right? Which constitutes that process. There could be a lot of, we should be able to abstract some of these business functions, or most of these business functions, into capabilities, right? So let's look at a set of business functions, right? So in a typical banking sector, say, like I should be approving a loan, I could be approving or even take the loan itself as a service, right? I could be approving the initial request for a loan. I may be approving the top up for a loan. I could be approving the closure of the loan, right? So these are all business functions that are part of different business processes, right? But when I abstract that, right, approval is a business capability, right? So when we abstract those business functions, we should be able to bring in the reusability across the business function, right? Across the business processes and business function, right? So that's a need. So if we just go with without abstracting with all the business functions, we may end up duplicating the functions across the business processes, right? So to get the reusability in and avoid duplication, we should do this one layer of abstraction to identify what are the different business capabilities we need to exhibit, right? Which can be realized into business function, right? So each of these business function basically enables the internal role with that capability, through using which the internal role can perform the business function, right? Now we look at the runtime model, right? On the runtime side, right, what happens, right? So each of these external role, basically an instance of an external role, which is an external actor, could create an event, right? Or an instance of an internal role, which is an internal actor, also creates an event, right? And basically it could be an internal process, or it could be an external process, right? So based on that, an event is triggered. That event trigger basically creates a process instance, right? We basically create an instance of that business process, which acts on the instance of business entities that are involved, right? So why I wanted to capture this runtime model is there are two additional aspects. I mean, so we looked at event as a component when it comes to runtime. So that's another important component. What are the events possible is an important component that we need to capture in the business architecture. And the other two important components that comes in is the feedback, right? So any process instance that runs has to provide the feedback to the initiator of the process. Right. So that could, when I say feedback, it could be any kind of acknowledgement, it could be an email acknowledgement, it could be an SMS, it could be a document we generate, etc. Right. So there should be some feedback that's going back to the actor who created the event. Right. So it could be in the end of the process feedback, or it could be a feedback in between. Right. So there could be multiple feedbacks as part of the process instance. And the other important aspect that in the recent world that becomes more important, very important, is the journey aspect, right? So a journey constitutes a set of process instances, right? So a customer who goes through a loan, a customer for a loan, right? Customer goes through a journey across the processes, right? So across the process instance, right? So journey is becoming more and more relevant in the current world, right? So that's an important component that we need to start capturing as part of the business architecture as well, right? So we will look into each of these components. We'll look into more detail. So I just briefed all the components we identified as part of the business architecture. So it could be roles and actors, right? Business services, business processes, business functions and capabilities which are abstraction of those business functions, business events, business entities, events, journeys, and feedback. So this is, in my view, constitutes a business architecture, right? The different components of the business architecture. So in these, we'll start in this video, rest of the video, we'll look at the roles and actors, right? And in the next subsequent videos, we'll look at each of these components in detail, right? To start with, we'll look at the external roles and actors. Right? So let's start with external roles, right? So this is a typical model of an external role, right? So an enterprise has a relationship with parties, right? It could be, the party could be a customer, partner, vendor, supplier, any one of those, right? So it could be any of this, right? So these are external relationships what an enterprise has, right? And the party basically constitutes a set of roles, right? So it could be a administrator of that party. I mean, let's look at then when we look at a business customer, there could be multiple roles. Wherein when we look at a consumer segment, that may be a limited set of roles, right? But still, a party consists of a set of roles, right? And each of these roles is guided by a policy, right? So if I am an administrator, I have a set of policies which enable me to do something. If I am just a user, right? So let's take a telecom sector, right? So if I am a B2B client customer of a telecom enterprise, right? I may have an admin who will be basically issuing the orders and managing the users, right? So there will be set of policies guiding the access levels or functions that role can perform, right? Whereas if I am just an end user using a mobile phone which was ordered by my admin, right? I'm just I have a limited access just to look at my mobile phone itself and my usage. I may not be able to issue an order, make changes to the services, etc. Right. So that's where the roles are, the relationship between the parties and the role, right? And each role can have any number of instances as an individual actor. So a role, say admin is a role, but we could have 2 or 3 different admins, which are 3 different actors, right? Individual actors. And these actors could be a digital actor or a human actor, right? So human actors, typical customer actors we see in the day-to-day. Digital actors are, it could be digital robot, like the remote processors, the agents that can run, right? RPA processors. It could be IoT modules in the new world. IoT modules or IoT devices are actors, right? They can issue orders, right? So in the next few years, we're going to see IoT devices performing the role of an actor, in a sense that it can be as good as a human actor, right? So, and it could be smart appliances, right? So which can actually take actions or generate events, right? Or the digital actor could be a software components like the ERP tools, right? So I can have my supply chain tool system in my enterprise, which can actually issue an order to an service provider, right? So if I want there is a request for an say there's a trouble. So assume in a typical enterprise there is a trouble ticket, right, for a network not working, right? I should be able to issue an order to a vendor to say that I need a person to come and fix it, right? So the supply chain or the ERP tools could be issuing an order, or the ITSM team tool, which is basically the ticketing tool, also could be able to. So to brief, the digital actor could be anything, right? Or it could be a human actor, right? So that's a brief on external roles and actors. Similarly, on internal roles and actors perspective, similar relationship. It's almost similar. So enterprise, instead of having parties, enterprise basically consists of segments, right? So we looked at in the previous videos on the breadth and depth segment, we looked at how enterprise needs to be broken down into segments. So any enterprise can be broken down into segments, right? So these segments could be portfolios or departments. It could be functional segments, or I'm capturing IT as an important segment here. Just wanted to make sure, because IT has always set of internal actors as developers or testers who have basically are privileged actors, right? So that's an important aspect that we need to capture, right? And so say similar, just like parties constitute of roles, each segment also have a set of roles, right? So set of employees performing some certain role, right? And then each role can have an instances, basically instances of actors, basically the employees or whoever is acting on behalf. And these actors again could be digital actor or a human actor, right? And each of these role is guided by a policy, set of policies, right? So typical same relationship, same kind of structure on an external role and an internal role perspective. So basically to capture an external or internal role, these are the typical components of it. So we need to have an enterprise. The enterprise is definitely a part of it. This segment, we need to have a set of segments. We need to identify what segment it is, and then it needs to have each segment has to have a set of roles, and it's guided by a policy, right? So all these aspects should be coming into play when we define a business architecture, right? So to summarize on this video, we basically looked at on a high level the architecture domain, 4 different domains, and then we covered business architecture, which covers logical components like business services, processes, functions, capabilities, roles and actors, and the runtime components, right? Events, journeys, feedback. And then we just did a little bit expanded on the external roles and actors and internal roles and actors. So in the next video, we'll primarily look at the business services, right?